Hi, it's Miss Dolores from Baldwin Borough Public Library. I'd like to welcome you to Two Chapter Tuesdays and thank the Allegheny County Library Association. We are partnering with the County Library Association this summer to bring programming across the county. So I know that last week Elaine Volpe from Bethel Park Library presented a book to you, and this week is our turn, and we are going to be reading the first two chapters of a book called Knights versus Dinosaurs by Matt Phelan, one of my favorite authors. He also has two other books in this series. The one after this is called Knights versus Monsters, and the one after that actually just recently came out. We don't have it cataloged in our system yet because it's so new, is Knights versus the End of Everything. And in this story, the setting is in Camelot, and in the second story it's not, and in the third story he heads back to Camelot. And he is a Pennsylvania author, and I met him probably years ago at a conference. I think it was like 2009 or 10, when he had written this book, Storm in the Barn, which is a graphic novel. I will show you. Excellent graphic novel, and we were doing it for a book club, a boys and like a dad and son book club, and I had met him and asked him to sign a copy and told him that we were doing the book for the book club, and he probably talked to me for 15-20 minutes. Super nice guy, and a great author. He also writes, in addition to juvenile fiction and graphic novels, he writes books for younger children also. This one is called Druthers, and this is a picture book. He writes and illustrates in his studio in Pennsylvania. And the other one that we have in right now is called Picnic, a little play on words from picnic. So I'll show you a few of the illustrations. That's from the Picnic book, and this one is from the Druthers book. He's very talented. So you could visit his website, mattphelan.com, and find out more about him and all about his new books. So we're going to get started reading the first two chapters of Knights versus Dinosaurs. When Sir Erec thought the whole thing over, he supposed that he shouldn't have said that he'd slain 40 dragons. 4 might have been more realistic. He also shouldn't have boasted in front of Merlin, the one person in court smart enough to know that fierce dragons were, more or less, a flagon of hooey. Now was not the time for reflection, however. A giant rampaging lizard had just tossed Sir Bors into a tree and was bearing down on poor Sir Hector. There's a page of illustration by Matt Phelan. So very detailed. If you go onto, just Google him and go onto YouTube, he has an excellent video of how he illustrates some of his work, and it's fascinating. So he has his own YouTube channel that you could follow along, and he also talks about the new book that just came out. Lance time, thought Sir Erec, but perhaps it would be best to start at the beginning. The banquet dragged on and on. Tales had been told, fruit had been juggled, songs had been sung. Oh, so many songs. But the worst of it was sharing time. Each knight who had stumbled back into Camelot over the past few days now stood before King Arthur with a report of his adventures. Sir Erec thought it might never end. Lancelot naturally had performed the bravest deeds, the most noble, the most scrambled for attention with various feats of daring do, most of which were exaggerated, to say the least. The knights all shared a deep secret. With the realm at peace, the knights spent a good deal of their time off in a field somewhere fighting one another. Not to slay, just for the sheer fun of it. They had armor and weapons, after all. It was a shame not to use them. Dragons, giants, trolls, and mythical beasts were in short supply. All knights believed in them, without question, of course, but the pesky creatures couldn't exactly be counted on to make an appearance, ever. So the knights embellished. One tale after another of battles with beasties, run-ins with rogue trolls, or fisticuffs with fierce giants. Erec sighed. He was tired. His tunic was slightly scratchy. Whatever the reason, when it was his turn to share, out it came in a loud, clear voice, a whopping big embellishment to shame the rest. Did you say you slayed 40 dragons? Asked Merlin with an air of polite interest. Yes, declared Sir Erec. The round table exploded with excitement. Knights spouted support or disbelief in a combination of both. All but the Black Knight. If you needed a tall, dangerously silent type, he was your man. No one had ever heard a peep from the Black Knight. Tonight, as always, he stood in a dark corner in full armor. He stayed rigid, staring at Erec through his visor and helm. Queen Guinevere spoke, instantly silencing the hall. That is the most amazing accomplishment, Sir Knight. Have you no trophy for your king? She asked. Oh dear, thought Erec. He began. You see, milady, it was like quite dark in the cave and... The cave? Marlin interrupted. Where is this cave? Far. Far away, actually. Oh, said Marlin, folding his napkin. It is not the cave I am thinking of. Surely you would have not been so fortunate in that particular cave. It was subtle, but the most famous marlin bait hung in the air. Marlin nibbled a carrot, waiting. Of what cave do you speak? Demanded Erec. He had no choice, really. This was all part of the act. If a dangerous adventure was dangling in front of you, a knight must respond. Marlin cleared his throat. Oh, you don't want to know. For in this cave lives the most fearsome creature of all, the terrible lizard. Lizard, eh? Said Erec. I shall go and slay this terrible lizard. Sir Bors slammed a fist onto the table. Nay, I shall slay it. Leave brave Sir Erec to rest after such a noble feat of slaying 40 dragons. The fever spread. Knights were a competitive bunch. I too should like to best this heretofore unknown creature, piped Sir Hector, who had an interest in new and exciting beasts. The Black Knight stepped forward, and a hush fell over the room. A creaky nod of his helmet announced he would also join the fun. Sir Erec rose and turned to King Arthur. With your permission, I shall face this terrible lizard. Erec looked back at Bors, Hector, and the Black Knight. With these three coming along, I suppose. Arthur poked at a stray pea on his plate. He often tuned out when the knights became overly excited. As you wish, brave knights. Mind the people, though. Of course, sire. Only the fearsome brute. Brutes, corrected Merlin. There may be a few, come to think of it. The more the merrier, quipped Sir Bors. He was not exactly funny, but he often came up with a witty line at a crucial or dangerous moment. Sir Erec gazed longingly at his mutton, but the deed was done. He had to make a show of it. I am off to prepare. I shall leave at first dawn. You will have the cave's location at dawn, said Merlin. Bring no horses or squires into the cave. You may, of course, pack a weapon or two. Your choice. He smiled. His gray eyes sparkled. Splendid, said Sir Erec, but it came out less booming than he had hoped. The weekend was off to a poor start. Okay, so chapter 2 is Adventure Merlin style. As the sun rose, Sir Erec perused the directions to the cave, which had appeared at his bedside. He then donned his armor with help from his squire, Derek. It took some time. Derek was more enthusiastic than he was skilled. For this reason, Sir Erec usually left his squire at home when he went adventuring. Following Merlin's rule about not bringing a squire into the cave would not be an issue. After a great deal of clanging, strapping, and adjusting, Erec was ready. Carrying his favorite broadsword and shield, he clanked his way to the stables. Sir Hector was already there, looking quite trim and rested. His garments were always rather clean, despite his numerous claims of adventure. Still, Hector, aside from suspicious cleanliness, was not a bad fellow. It could have been worse. Then there was Bors. He was worse. A brute in shining armor, Bors was a might makes right man through and through. Might makes right was the philosophy that if you could pound something harder than the next person, then you should do as you please. King Arthur had been doing his best to dissuade his knights of this idea, but old habits die hard. Bor's squire, a thin lad named Mel, struggled with the knight's many weapons. He carried swords of all sizes, a mace, a lance, a shield, several knives, and even a few rocks. Bors believed in being prepared for any and all encounters. Sir Erec, bellowed Bors, a fine day to smite a treacherous lizard, eh? Terrible lizard, Bors, said Erec. Get the name right. You don't want to confuse the minstrels later. Also, remember that my name is spelled with 2 E's. The minstrels will need to know that as well, since I shall be the slayer. And you will not be alive to spell it yourself, I wager, countered Bors. Hector chuckled. Good one, Bors. Erec simmered. It is very early in the morning, he said. I will furnish a retort in fine wit momentarily. Thunk! A great axe chopped through the block of wood, startling the knights and horses and several chickens. The Black Knight lifted the axe and regarded the knights. He turned and swept onto his midnight black steed. Of course, a witty retort is not always necessary, mumbled Erec. Mal, barked Bors. Load the weapons. Horse and follow me. Sir Bors, we are to leave our squires, said Hector. My squire is required as far as the cave. He will then tend to our horses. Did none of you think of that? Erec and Hector looked at each other. They shrugged. Their armor creaked slightly. Looks like I'll be doing the thinking for this adventure, said Bors. Marvelous. This is getting better and better, Erec grumbled to Hector. Erec snapped his reins and led the others to the gate. Hector followed, trying to jockey to the front. Bors took his horse to the left in an attempt to pass them both. The Black Knight rode silently and steadily behind them with nothing to prove whatsoever. Yonder is the cave, announced Hector, pointing to a shale hilllock with a small opening near the crest. Is that not the cave of Reginald the Hermit? Asked Bors. No, replied Hector. Reginald the Hermit moved last summer. He wanted something with a nice view, by the lake. Silence, commanded Erec. We shall leave the horses here and proceed on foot. We know not the manner of this beast, and we must approach with caution. You would know, O great dragon slayer, Bors snickered. I will approach on foot, but not because you suggested it. I thought of it moments ago. I too had created a similar strategy, piped Hector. The Black Knight dismounted, in silence. The cave entrance was unremarkable. It was just wide enough for the 4 knights to enter single file, as they did in the following order. Sir Erec, then the Black Knight, then Sir Hector, and lastly, Sir Bors. Clang! Oh, and Mel, Sir Bors' squire. Mel carried a large, bulky canvas sack filled with weapons. It was the lance that gave him trouble at the entrance. Erec looked back, annoyed. Bors, Merlin said, no squires. Who will carry my weapons then? I, for one, prefer to be prepared. Also, I have difficulty choosing sometimes. But Merlin, Hector began to speak. Oh, Merlin, I'll talk that one with his rules and little tusks. You never see Merlin slaying a dragon, do you? What does he know about anything? As if in answer, 4 torches suddenly ignited, lighting a passage deeper into the cave. Let's continue on, Erec said, and pulled his sword from its scabbard. They followed the path and emerged in a small chamber of solid rock, also lit by torches. A flat stone sat in the center of the chamber. On it was a large leather-bound book. This seems to be the end of the cave, said Erec, poking the wall with his sword. Perhaps the terrible lizard stepped out for a bite, said Hector. Well, it left its book, said Erec, poking the book with his sword. It can read? Asked Hector. I can't even read, you dunderhead, snapped Bors. Who are you calling a dunderhead? Demanded Hector. I can read beautifully. My father believed a knight should be well-rounded. Hector inspected the book. It has a title, The Terrible Lizards. Merlin sent us to slay a book, growled Bors. Hector opened the book. A strong wind blew through the cave and extinguished the torches. Then darkness and silence. Well, it certainly seems to be Merlin's book, observed Erec. A tentative voice came from the entrance of the chamber. Sirs? What is it, squire? Barked Bors. Only that, you see, there's a tree outside the cave. So? Well, it wasn't there before. The Black Knight strode back down the passage. The other knights followed. At the mouth of the cave, they stood stock still for a moment. Then the Black Knight drew his enormous broadsword from its scabbard. Directly outside the cave were the tops of tall, vine-covered trees. Below spread a lush forest, overgrown with large ferns and moss. To the west, a barren land of dirt and dust, and enormous rock formations. Merlin, said Erec. Merlin, gulped Hector. Merlin, growled Bors. The Black Knight pointed to the book in Hector's hands. Yes, right, Hector said. Perhaps there is some guidance here. He began to page through the book. Erec gazed at the unfamiliar terrain. It must be an illusion. See if it says how to break the spell. Tyrannosaurus Rex, read Hector slowly. Rex? Erec interrupted. That means king, a tyrant king. Splendid. It's a mission. We take care of this tyrant king and the illusion fades. Let's go. Muttered Hector. Close the book, Hector. Look lively, said Bors. Hector closed the book, but he did not look particularly lively. All right, that is the end of chapter 2. I hope you will request this book. You can also download it onto a device or app through Libby, Libbey, and you can put it on your iPad or your phone and hopefully read the rest and find out what happens when knights versus dinosaurs. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back next Tuesday. Have a nice day.